In 1922, when they finally opened the tomb of a teenage Egyptian king, they found what you'd expect: gold, jewels, a throne fit for a god. And tucked in among all of it, something far more modest: small black seeds, placed there on purpose to travel with the king into the afterlife. Someone decided this little seed belonged right next to the treasure of a pharaoh. That same seed is still sold today in pretty much every health shop on Earth, with a reputation that borders on the absurd. So the question worth asking is simple. Is black seed oil the miracle the internet keeps promising, or is there something more honest and, frankly, more interesting going on underneath? Let's start with the reputation, because it's hard to overstate. This little seed has the longest resume in the history of natural medicine. Legend has it that Cleopatra used its oil for her skin and hair, and that Nefertiti did too, though that part lives more in story than in hard evidence, so hold it loosely. What's better documented is that the ancient Egyptians valued the seed enough to bury it with royalty. The Greek physicians Hippocrates and Dioscorides wrote about it, and it shows up in old texts right across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And then there's the line that did more for this seed than any advertisement ever could. In Islamic tradition, in the Hadith collections of Bukhari and Muslim, the Prophet Muhammad is recorded as saying, "There is healing in the black seed for every disease except death." For well over 1,000 years, that single sentence carried this seed into kitchens and medicine cabinets all over the world. Now, a cure for every disease is an enormous claim. Keep it in your back pocket because we are going to come back to it honestly by the end. So, what is it really underneath the legend? The plant is called Nigella sativa. You might know the seeds as kalonji, those tiny black specks on naan bread, on some bagels, in a lot of South Asian and Middle Eastern cooking. People have eaten them as plain food for thousands of years. But the reason scientists got interested isn't the whole seed so much as one compound packed inside it: thymoquinone. When you read the research, that word is everywhere, because most of black seed's measurable effects seem to trace back to this single molecule. So when we talk about what the science actually shows, we are really talking about thymoquinone. And here's the thread that ties the whole story together. At its core, thymoquinone is an anti-inflammatory. Now stay with me, because that word gets thrown around so much it's almost lost its meaning. So let me make it concrete. Inside your cells, there's something close to a master switch for inflammation. Scientists call it NF-kappa B. When it's flipped on, your body cranks out the chemical messengers that drive swelling, redness, and that low, simmering irritation that can quietly hang around for years. What the research consistently shows is that thymoquinone turns that dial down, and at the same time, switches on your body's own built-in antioxidant defenses. And here's why that matters, and why it's the honest version of the cure-everything legend. Chronic, low-grade inflammation sits underneath an enormous range of modern problems. How you age, your metabolism, your joints, your gut, your skin. So a compound that genuinely turns that dial down isn't magic, but it is the kind of thing that could plausibly nudge a lot of different systems at once. Not a cure for everything, more like one lever connected to a lot of things. So let's get specific and start with the one most people can actually feel: seasonal allergies. If your spring is a fog of sneezing, a runny nose, itchy eyes, and a head full of congestion, this is the most everyday payoff in the whole story. Because hay fever is, at its heart, an inflammatory overreaction. Your immune system meeting harmless pollen and treating it like an invasion. And this is where black seed has some of its strongest human evidence. A 2024 review that pooled together 8 separate randomized trials found that it meaningfully improved allergy symptoms. Less congestion, less sneezing, less of that runny, itchy misery. In one small trial, it even held its own against a common prescription allergy medication. A couple of honest details, though. The effects in these trials tended to show up within about 2 weeks, so it is not instant. And both tradition and the way those trials run suggest that if you're going to try it for hay fever, starting a few weeks before your usual season hits, makes more sense than waiting until you're already streaming. It is not a replacement for what your doctor has given you, but as one of the better studied natural options for allergies, it's a genuinely reasonable thing to be curious about. Now the one that surprises people: blood sugar. This is where black seed quietly has some of its most consistent research, and also where I need to be the most careful with you. A 2025 analysis pooled 16 randomized trials in people with type 2 diabetes. Black seed was linked to real reductions in fasting blood sugar, in HbA1c, that's the 3-month average of your blood sugar, and in cholesterol and LDL as well. So this isn't folklore. The effect is measurable. But here's the honest framing, and please don't skip it. These were studies in people who already had diabetes, using black seed on top of their normal care, as an add-on, not a replacement. The effect was real, but modest, not the kind of thing that rewrites a treatment plan. And this part matters most. If you take any medication that lowers your blood sugar, then adding something else that also lowers it is exactly the kind of thing to talk through with your doctor first, not to stack on your own. The goal here is information, not a prescription. The seed is interesting. Your safety comes first. So let's come back to that enormous claim from the beginning: a cure for every disease except death. Here's the honest reckoning. As a literal medical statement, no. The moment something supposedly fixes every problem, you are usually being sold to, not informed. But strip the hype away, and what's left is genuinely impressive for a humble seed. A real active compound, a real anti-inflammatory effect, with a known mechanism, and a handful of areas: allergies, blood sugar, cholesterol, inflammation itself, where the human evidence is actually decent, not just hopeful. The ancient world wasn't entirely wrong, they just didn't have the word thymoquinone. Which leads to two practical truths, if you ever decide to explore it. First, quality is all over the place. The compound that does the work is thymoquinone, and the amount in different products varies wildly. Many bottles won't even tell you. A cheap oil that's been heat-treated and left sitting under shop lights for a year may have very little of the active compound left. If a product is serious, it tends to actually say how much thymoquinone it contains. And second, the oldest form is also the gentlest. As a simple oil, people have used safely for thousands of years. That's a very different thing from megadosing a concentrated extract. So if curiosity wins, the food-first version is the time-tested place to begin. And if you do try it for something specific, your allergies, say, or your inflammation, here's the grown-up way to actually know whether it's working for you, instead of trusting a vibe. Notice your symptoms honestly, before and after. And if it's something measurable, like your metabolic or inflammatory markers, the only real answer comes from actually checking them with proper blood work, ideally with someone who can help you read them, rather than guessing. Your own body will give you better data than any review online. So let's pull it together. A seed old enough to ride into the afterlife with a king, a reputation big enough to promise the impossible, and underneath all of it, a real compound that turns down inflammation, with honest, specific evidence for allergies, for blood sugar, for your cholesterol. Not a miracle, not nothing. Something quieter and more useful than either extreme. Take whatever here is genuinely useful to you, and leave the rest. And if you're managing a real condition, make your doctor part of the conversation. If this gave you a new way to think about an old remedy, save it so you can come back to it, and drop a comment with the next remedy you want pulled apart honestly.